In 1506, a man named Tristão Da Cunha was commanding a fleet of ships taking the viceroy of Portuguese colonies in India from Lisbon to India. On the way, he got swept south, and though he couldn't land, he did see a small group of islands in the distance that he gave his own name, Tristan da Cunha. The main island, also called Tristan da Cunha, is 90 km squared and lies 2,800 km west of Cape Town and 3,360 km east of Uruguay. It was seen a couple of times in the later 16th and 17th century. A map made in the 16th century even shows the island group. A Dutchman, Kleis Gerritzoen Byron Broodspot, which is an insanely Dutch name, stopped for supplies in the February of 1643, and we only know this because of a subsequent visit by Jacob Gommersbach that he recorded in the mid-1650s that says they found, quote, a small board or plank nailed to the rocks on which the year 1643 was written, with the names of the expedition leaders. These guys were there because the Dutch East India Company on the 6th of October 1654 instructed another guy, Jan van Riebeek, to, quote, have someone explore the islands of Tristan da Cunha in order to find out if said islands possess any special resources which would transform them into a naval refreshment station. This mission found Tristan to be unsuitable for such a thing, but of course this would not stop people from trying. The first resident of the island was John Patton, a captain from Philadelphia who stayed there between August 1790 and April 1791, mainly hunting for sealskins and whale oil. The next people to settle the island were Jonathan Lambert and two friends, Tommaso Corey and Andrew Miller, in 1810. Lambert claimed the island as his own. Some called him the island's king. He said he took, quote, absolute possession of the island solely for myself and my heirs forever. He even tried to rename the island group to the Islands of Refreshment and gave it a new flag. For a couple of years, these men were left to their own devices, mainly hunting seal and trading them with ships sailing by. But then England, fearing an attempt by the French to free Napoleon from the near-ish St. Helena, annexed the island and claimed ownership on the 14th of August 1816, bringing many Englishmen to the island. But when they arrived, only Tommaso Corey was still there. He claimed the two other men had been in an accident at sea and drowned near a nearby island, but years after his death in the 1850s, Reverend Taylor said, quote, tradition whispers fearful things concerning the unhappy end to Lambert's rule, and continued to say that when Corey drank, he was, quote, wont to show signs of terror at the mention of Lambert. Another rumour from the island says that those first three men were made rich through selling oil and sealskins, and they hid the gold they accumulated somewhere, but Corey didn't get to tell anyone before he suddenly died in September 1817. Most of the English after a few years were ready to leave a few months after their arrival in October. One boat, HMS Julia, sailing out at 2:30 am got into a shipwreck in the difficult waters and 55 people lost their life. A plaque was put up to honour them. This sadly wouldn't be the only shipwreck Tristan would suffer. But ignoring that for a second, in the 1820s women arrived on the island for the first time, some from St. Helena, some wives of the English folk who stayed on the island, and the population started to gradually grow. Looking at the graph, you'll see a big drop in 1856 and 57. This was actually not a tragedy, but instead sort of a coalescing of events. William Glass, who was an original founder of the settlement, had died, and his widow, children and grandchildren, which was 25 people, almost a quarter of the population, emigrated to America, and Reverend Taylor from earlier became convinced in his few years here that people needed to emigrate for demographic comfort and economic reasons. So when he left in 1857, he took many with him. These two events made the population drop from 103 to 33 between January 1856 and March 1857. Despite this drop, the settlement survived and started to grow again, getting quickly back to the population of 100, but then a second shipwreck happened. 15 men went off the island by ship in order to converse and trade with a passing ship a few kilometers out. Those 15 men did not return. The islanders claimed that they saw them meet the other ship, but the captain of the other ship said they disappeared before reaching them. What actually happened we may never know, but the ship getting lost in the awful seas despite the unique boat the islanders had invented with canvas stretch over one frame seems fairly likely to me. The next disaster to hit Tristan da Cunha was less instantaneous. The steamboat. With the steamboat, Tristan da Cunha as a rest spot for ships ceased being needed, and the use of Tristan for whale oil began to be defunct too, as oil was discovered in Pennsylvania in 1859. This ushered in the loneliest period for the islanders. Those few decades were often interrupted by British officials coming to the island to attempt to convince the islanders to emigrate to South Africa, because they felt it was more trouble than it was worth to keep Tristan da Cunha alive, but most of the islanders refused to leave. The next notable event for the island was World War II. A number of officers and their families were stationed there, and because of this, the island finally got its first school, which the Scientific American had noted the lack of in 1917. Also brought to the island was currency. Then, after the war, the naval station they set up on the island was abandoned, and the South African government put a meteorological station there, which meant supply ships were going there regularly and permanent two-way radio was installed. Fishing companies from Cape Town, South Africa started to come over with an interest in exploiting the waters around Tristan for crayfish, which were becoming popular in America. A freezing plant was made and the economy of the island largely became men fishing and women working in the freezing plant. This industry, economy and school thus ushered Tristan into modernity. Early on August 6, 1961, midwinter for the island, shelves and windows shook. An earthquake had hit the island for the first time since being settled. These earthquakes kept happening, and by the end of August they were happening 2 or 3 times a day. By this time the island had appointed an administrator from Britain, Peter Wheeler, who wrote about his experience in these few months in the National Geographic. Scientists from England didn't believe there was anything to worry about, assuming it was just the tremors from the setting fault line they believed Tristan laid on. The earthquakes continued, and Wheeler wrote on September 17th, quote, "Suddenly the walls heaved, the floor trembled, and the roof threatened to cave in." As this was happening, a number of the women and children sailed to the nearby Nightingale Island using those canvas boats. Wheeler says there was some relief that even if Tristan is lost, they may at least have Nightingale Island, and the scientists from England continue to say it was nothing major to worry about. The remaining islanders did a few tests, separating into groups and going to other parts of the island to test the impact of the earthquakes, and found it was incredibly localized to the one town on the island, which was obviously very worrying. The certainty that the people in England had that there was nothing to worry about began faltering. The islanders feared the ledge which the settlement lay on was going to be sliding into the ocean any day now, and by the end of September rocks began falling out of the sky. Cracked lines began forming on the walls of the houses, and through footpaths people moved westwards to untouched homes, trying not to think about the cracks in their homes. Looking in the morning and the cracks had closed up, then 200 yards to the east, new cracks and crevices and slopes were being created. It had become a meters-high cliff, and there was clearly great pressure underground. The cliff became a bubble, and it kept swelling at 5 feet an hour. An eruption was imminent. The Krakatoa eruption that killed 36,000 people and was felt around the world was on top of everyone's mind. One morning the administrator was shaken awake and told, quote, "The bubble's blown open, pushing up rock and hot cinders and belching smoke. The island had to be evacuated." Very luckily for those on the island, a Dutch ocean liner happened to be passing by, and using the radios they could call for help, and they were taken to Cape Town along with those on Nightingale Island. One refugee said upon docking, quote, "We were amazed at the first sight of Cape Town and its buildings." Very quickly, the British government, taking some advantage of this opportunity, brought the islanders to England. As a note, some of the islanders were mixed race, so perhaps getting out of apartheid South Africa was preferable, though certainly a jarring few days. Peter Wheeler ends his piece with, quote, "That is the end of my story, for the island of Tristan da Cunha may not be inhabited again during our lifetime." When in England, the government put them in a small village of their own called Cowshot. And of course the safety was appreciated, and many of the islanders thrived, and many old visitors to the island came to say hello, such as Peter Munch and Anne Crawford, both of whom created works I've used in this video. But most of the islanders preferred their life on the island. Clara Glass writes to a newspaper saying she wants to go home, quote, "where there is no crime or murdering." Another issue of moving the isolated islanders was, whilst they had been inoculated against diseases, many still suffered over the British winter, with 4 dying of pneumonia. Eventually, England sent people to look at the island to evaluate the damage. By October 14th, the bubble was 70 metres high and lava was flowing out, burying the freezing plant that brought industry to the island. Later, in December, the bubble was 150 metres high, and every 10 minutes, a crater at its summit puffed a white cloud, and a loud bang erupted, and lava blasted 30 metres into the air. Miraculously, though, the settlement was almost intact. In April 1962, the British scientists had said the eruption had ceased and the settlement was fine, and cattle had survived. The islanders independently agreed 12 men would return to Tristan immediately and prepare the island for the rest return, but the colonial office denied them, to much public outcry, which forced them to reverse this decision and let the 12 men return. And so they did, on September 8th of 1962, and they found that the usual beach that they had used for docking had been entirely covered by volcanic debris, but it also created a new one that they could use. Only one house was severely damaged, and whilst the lava was still warm, the eruption had definitely stopped. The remaining islanders in England had to canvass themselves to get the government to send them back still, and in March another advance party was sent, and then everyone had arrived back on the 10th of November 1963. They were finally home after 2 years.
Peggy, when you left England, you said you were very sorry to go. Do you still feel like that?
Yes. I'd like to go back again.
When do you plan to do so?
Well, at the earliest possible moment, as soon as I'm 21.
You seem pretty keen to get away. Why?
Because life in England's better.
That was an interview done with Peggy Rogers after she came home from the eruption. Being in England had altered the mindset of many of the younger islanders, who came back with modern dress senses, diets, and tastes in entertainment. The islanders named the new harbour Cowshot Harbour to remember their time in England, and Cowshot named the street the islanders stayed in Tristan Close. The fish freezing plant the volcano had destroyed was rebuilt. Electricity was brought to the village. Old paths became paved streets. They built cash and transistor radios and replaced the picturesque thatch roofs with corrugated aluminium. I think Jelle puts it nicely when he says, perhaps the Tristans had indeed rejected the 20th century, but it nevertheless followed them home. More recently, the younger people in the island have shown again a desire for leaving. As with many more isolated communities, there is a want to be closer to the centre of culture and civilization.
How many of you, when you leave school, would like to leave the island? Wow.
I hope I've shown here that this isn't a new phenomenon. If Tommaso Cori's story is to be believed, as early as the 1810s, the king of the island was sailing away back to America. The island is beautiful with a wonderful history that I'd love to know more about, so feel free to tell me. And if you've been there or lived there, please say hello. That's all. Bye bye. Wasn't exactly sure how to end this video because, the island is still going. People still live there. The population is starting to decrease, but that sort of happens to the island every so often anyway. The original title for this video was Why the Hell Do 250 British People Live in the Loneliest Island? But as I researched it, I was like, wait, they're kind of cool. Also, as per usual, sources are all in the description if you put on subtitles. They'll appear where they've been used, and feel free to correct me if you think I've got something wrong. And now, for real, bye bye.